The stagecoach rattled to a stop, kicking up a cloud of red dust that clung to Abigail Warren's worn boots. She stepped onto the cracked earth of Willow Creek, a frontier town cradled by jagged mountains and whispering pines, her heart pounding with the weight of a dream she'd carried for 1,000 miles. At 32, Abigail was no delicate flower. Her broad shoulders and sturdy frame spoke of years, toiling on her family's failing farm in Ohio. Her plain face, dusted with freckles and her body heavier than society deemed proper, had drawn sneers back home. But here in this untamed corner of 1850s Montana, she'd hoped for a fresh start, a husband who'd see her for her strength, not her size. The letter from Thomas Grayson, a cattle rancher seeking a mail-order bride, had been folded and refolded so many times it was soft as cloth. His words had been kind, practical, promising a partnership built on mutual respect. Abigail had clung to those words through the long, bone-rattling journey west. Now standing in the town square, her carpetbag heavy in her hand, she scanned the crowd for a man matching Thomas's description, tall, dark-haired, with eyes like the sky after a storm. Instead, a wiry man in a tailored coat approached, his lip curling as he took her in. "You're Abigail Warren." His voice was sharp like a blade slicing through her hope. This was Thomas, but his gaze held none of the warmth she'd imagined. "I expected someone different," he said, his eyes lingering on her curves with undisguised disappointment. "This won't do. I need a wife who can keep up appearances, not this." He gestured vaguely at her, his words a slap. The townsfolk nearby, women in bonnets, men hauling sacks of grain, paused to stare. Abigail's cheeks burned, but she squared her shoulders, her voice steady despite the sting. "You wrote of partnership, Mr. Grayson. Did you mean only for someone who fits your mirror?" Thomas's face reddened, but he turned away muttering about a mistake. The crowd dispersed, their whispers trailing like smoke. Alone, Abigail stood in the dust, the mountains looming like silent judges. She'd come all this way, left everything behind, only to be rejected before she'd even unpacked. But she hadn't survived floods, droughts, and her father's drunken rages by crumbling. She'd find a way forward, even if it meant building a life alone in this wild place. As dusk painted the sky in hues of apricot and lavender, Abigail trudged toward the boarding house, the scent of pine and wood smoke filling her lungs. A man leaned against a fence post nearby, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He was tall, his frame lean but strong like the oaks back home. He tipped his hat, revealing eyes that caught the fading light, blue-gray, steady kind. "Rough day, miss?" he asked, his voice low and warm, like a fire on a cold night. Abigail hesitated, wary of pity. "Nothing I can't handle," she said, gripping her bag tighter. He nodded as if he understood more than she'd said and pointed her toward the boarding house with a calloused hand. "Name's Caleb Holt. If you need anything, I'm just past the river." His smile was small but genuine, and for a moment the weight on her chest lightened. Inside the boarding house, Abigail met Eliza, a wiry woman with a quick laugh who ran the place. Over a supper of cornbread and the stew, Eliza listened to Abigail's story, her eyes crinkling with sympathy. "Thomas Grayson's a fool," she said, passing Abigail a mug of cider, "but Willow Creek's got room for a woman with grit. You'll see." That night, as Abigail lay in her narrow bed, the howl of a distant coyote mingled with her thoughts. Thomas's rejection stung, but Caleb's quiet kindness lingered, a flicker of hope in the dark. She'd come here for a husband, but maybe Willow Creek held something more, a chance to prove herself, to build something lasting. Tomorrow she'd start. The morning sun spilled over the mountains, casting golden threads across Willow Creek's muddy streets, but Abigail woke with a knot in her stomach. Thomas Grayson's rejection echoed in her mind, each word a pebble in her shoe. She rose, splashing cold water on her face from a chipped basin, and studied her reflection in the boarding house's cloudy mirror. Her round cheeks, her sturdy frame, she'd never been the delicate beauty men like Thomas wanted. But her hands were strong, her heart stronger. She'd make a place here with or without him. Downstairs, Eliza was already bustling, her apron dusted with flour. "Got a job for you if you're up for it," she said, sliding a plate of biscuits across the table. "Widow Jenkins needs help with her garden. Pays in coin and vegetables. It's hard work, but you look like you can handle it." Abigail nodded, grateful for the chance to prove her worth. She tucked a biscuit in her pocket and set out, the scent of damp earth and blooming sagebrush filling her lungs. Widow Jenkins's homestead sat on the edge of town, a weathered cabin surrounded by a tangle of weeds and wilted crops. The old woman, frail but sharp-eyed, sized Abigail up. "You're the one Grayson turned away," she said bluntly. Abigail stiffened, but Widow Jenkins waved a hand. "His loss. Can you dig?" Abigail rolled up her sleeves, her muscles honed from years of farm work and set to turning the rocky soil. The labor was grueling, the sun relentless, but each spadeful felt like a defiance of Thomas's scorn. As she worked, a shadow fell across the garden. Caleb Holt stood at the fence, a sack of grain slung over his shoulder. His hat was pushed back, revealing sweat-dampened dark hair and those steady blue-gray eyes. "Heard you were out here," he said, setting the sack down. "Thought you might need a hand." Abigail wiped her brow, wary but curious. "I can manage," she said, but Caleb just grinned, grabbing a shovel. "Never said you couldn't. Just thought two'd be faster than one." They worked side by side, the rhythm of their shovels a quiet duet. Caleb didn't fill the silence with empty chatter, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He told her about Willow Creek, its harsh winters, its tight-knit folks, its prejudices too. "Some here judge quick," he said, glancing at her. "But they'll come around when they see what you're made of." His tone wasn't pitying, but knowing, as if he'd faced his own share of judgment. By noon, the garden was transformed neat rows ready for planting. Widow Jenkins pressed a few coins and a basket of carrots into Abigail's hands, her nod one of respect. As Abigail and Caleb walked back toward town, the river glinting beside them, she felt a spark of pride. She'd earned her first wage in Willow Creek, and Caleb's quiet companionship had made the work lighter. But trouble loomed. At the general store, Abigail overheard whispers. Thomas Grayson, it seemed, was spreading word that she was unsuitable, a burden no man would want. The shopkeeper, a pinched-faced woman named Margaret, eyed Abigail coldly as she bought a spool of thread. "Hope you're not planning to stay long," Margaret said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've got standards here." Abigail's temper flared, but she bit it back, her coins clinking firmly on the counter. Outside, Caleb waited, his expression darkening, as Abigail recounted Margaret's words. "Thomas is stirring trouble," he said, his jaw tight. "He's got influence, but he's no king. You keep doing what you're doing, Abigail. Folks will see the truth." His faith in her was a lifeline, but as they parted ways, a new figure caught her eye. A woman with golden curls and a confident smile watching Caleb from across the street. She was Clara, Caleb's old flame, as Eliza later told her, a beauty who'd left him heartbroken years ago and now seemed keen to reclaim him. That night, Abigail sat by her window, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. Thomas's cruelty, Margaret's scorn, Clara's presence, they were weeds in her new life. But Caleb's kindness, Widow Jenkins's trust, Eliza's friendship, they were seeds. She'd plant them deep, let them grow. Tomorrow she'd take on more work, show Willow Creek who she was, and maybe, just maybe, Caleb's steady gaze meant something more. The river sang softly, its waters catching the dawn's blush, as Abigail knelt to scrub laundry at its edge. The cold bit her fingers, but the rhythm of the work steadied her racing thoughts. 3 days in Willow Creek, and the town's whispers had grown louder. Thomas Grayson's words painting her as a misfit, too heavy, too plain, too bold for a proper wife. Each rumor stung like a nettle, but Abigail scrubbed harder, her jaw set. She'd faced worse than gossip back in Ohio. She'd outlast this too. Eliza had sent her to the river with a basket of linens, a chance to earn a few more coins. But as Abigail worked, she felt eyes on her. Across the bank, 2 women in crisp calico dresses watched, their heads bent together, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Grayson was right to send her packing, one muttered loud enough to carry. "Who'd want that for a wife?" Abigail's hands stilled, the wet cloth dripping in her grip. She wanted to shout back, to demand what made them so superior, but she swallowed the words. She learned long ago that anger only fed their kind. A shadow moved beside her, and Caleb appeared, his boots crunching on the gravel. He carried a fishing pole, but his eyes were on the women across the river, narrowing as he caught their words. "Pay them no mind," he said, crouching to rinse his hands in the water. "They're just parroting Thomas. He's got a knack for turning folks against each other." Abigail met his gaze, her voice low. "Why's he got it out for me? He's the one who called me here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Thomas likes control. You didn't fit his picture. so he's making sure no one else sees you clear." His words were a comfort, but they didn't erase the ache. As they worked in companionable silence, Abigail scrubbing Caleb casting his line, she studied him. His hands were rough, his shirt patched, but there was a quiet strength in him, a steadiness that made her feel seen. He spoke of the land of the elk that roamed the mountains, of the way the river carved its will through stone. "Takes time," he said, reeling in a small trout. "But even the hardest rock gives way eventually." She wondered if he meant the river or her. Their peace was shattered by Clara's arrival. She sauntered down the bank, her golden curls gleaming, her smile sharp as a blade. "Caleb Holt, wasting your morning with laundry women," she teased, her voice honeyed but cutting. Her eyes flicked to Abigail, dismissive, before settling on Caleb. "I'm hosting a dance Saturday. You'll come, won't you? For old times' sake." Caleb's expression stayed neutral, but Abigail caught the flicker of pain in his eyes. "I'll think on it, Clara," he said, his tone polite but distant. Clara lingered, chatting about the dance, her words a subtle claim on Caleb's attention. Abigail focused on her work, but each laugh from Clara felt like a challenge. When Clara finally left, her skirt swishing, Caleb sighed. "She's persistent," he said almost to himself. Abigail dared a question. "You and her, you were close once?" Caleb nodded, his gaze on the river. "Thought I loved her. She wanted a bigger life, left for San Francisco. Came back last month acting like nothing's changed." His voice held no bitterness, only resignation. That afternoon, Abigail returned to Widow Jenkins' garden, her hands still raw from the river. The old woman greeted her with a rare smile, pointing to a patch of new sprouts. "Your work's taking root," she said. "Takes a strong hand to make things grow here." The praise warmed Abigail, but as she walked back to town, she saw Thomas Grayson outside the saloon, his arm around Clara. Their laughter rang out, and Abigail's stomach twisted. Were they plotting to keep her an outcast, or was Clara's interest in Caleb the real threat? At the boarding house, Eliza poured her a cup of coffee, her eyes sharp. "Clara's sniffing around Caleb again, and Thomas is fanning the flames. They're trouble, those two, but you've got more grit than both of them combined." Abigail gripped the mug, the warmth seeping into her hands. She wasn't here to fight Clara or beg for Thomas's approval. She was here to build a life. And Caleb, his quiet support, his steady presence, was starting to feel like part of that life, whether she meant it to or not. As night fell and the scent of pine drifted through her window, Abigail made a vow she would go to that dance with her head held high. The fiddle's wail cut through the crisp night air, pulling Abigail toward the glowing barn at the edge of Willow Creek. Lanterns swung from the rafters, casting a warm halo over the crowd, their laughter mingling with the scent of hay and apple cider. She'd almost stayed away the memory of Thomas's rejection and the town's whispers like weights on her heart. But as she'd brushed her dark hair and slipped into her only good dress, a simple blue muslin that hugged her curves, she'd decided she wouldn't hide. Not tonight, not ever. The barn was alive with movement, couples spinning to the music, their boots thumping on the wooden floor. Abigail stood at the threshold, her breath catching, at the sight of Caleb across the room. He leaned against a post, his dark hair slightly tousled, his blue-gray eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment their gazes locked, and his slow smile sent a flutter through her chest. But then Clara swept in, her crimson dress flaring like a flame, her hand resting on Caleb's arm with easy familiarity. Abigail's confidence wavered, but she straightened, smoothing her dress. She wasn't here to compete, she was here to belong. Eliza, bustling by with a tray of cornbread, caught her arm. "You look fine, Abigail. Don't let Clara's peacocking fool you. Go on, mingle." Abigail nodded, forcing herself to step into the crowd. She greeted Widow Jenkins, who sat fanning herself, and chatted with a shy blacksmith who stammered but smiled at her warmth. Slowly the room felt less hostile, the music a little brighter. She even laughed when a child tugged her hand, begging her to join a reel. But the whispers hadn't stopped. Near the cider table, Margaret the shopkeeper stood with Thomas Grayson, their heads bent together. "She's got nerve showing up," Margaret hissed, her eyes cutting to Abigail. Thomas smirked. "Let her try. No man here's desperate enough." Their words were a blade, but Abigail refused to bleed. She turned away only to find Caleb approaching, his expression unreadable. "Dance with me," he asked, extending a hand. His voice was steady, but there was a question in his eyes as if he sensed her hesitation. She took his hand, her palm warm against his calloused fingers, and they joined the reel. The music swept them up, and for a moment it was just them, the world blurring into the rhythm of their steps, the brush of his shoulder against hers. "You're lighter on your feet than you let on," he teased, his breath warm against her ear. Abigail laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in months. "And you're not as clumsy as you look," she shot back. His grin widened and something unspoken passed between them, a spark fragile but real. The dance ended too soon, and Clara was quick to reclaim Caleb, her laughter loud as she pulled him into the next set. Abigail stepped back, her chest tight, but she refused to let jealousy take root. Instead, she joined Eliza, helping serve food, her hands steady as she passed out plates. The townsfolk began to notice her quick smile, her willingness to help. A farmer's wife thanked her for the cornbread, and a young boy shyly asked her name. Small victories, but they felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. As the night wore on, Thomas approached, his smile oily. "Enjoying yourself, Miss Warren. Pity you've no prospects here." His words were meant to wound, but Abigail met his gaze. "I'm not here for your pity, Mr. Grayson. I'm here for me." His smirk faltered, and he walked away, but not before Clara joined him, her eyes glinting with something sharper than amusement. Abigail sensed a storm brewing. Clara's interest in Caleb wasn't just nostalgia, and Thomas's cruelty wasn't just pride. They were allies in something, and she was their target. Later, as the crowd thinned, Caleb found her by the barn door, the night air cool against her flushed skin. "You held your own tonight," he said, his voice low. "Not everyone can do that." The stars above glittered like scattered coins, and Abigail felt a quiet strength settle in her bones. "I'm not done yet," she said, meeting his eyes. He nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. As she walked back to the boarding house, the scent of hay lingering on her dress, Abigail felt the town shift around her. She wasn't welcome yet, but she was here, and Caleb's hand in hers, even for a moment, had felt like a promise of what she wasn't sure. But she'd find out. Dawn broke over Willow Creek with a chorus of birdsong, but Abigail's heart was a battlefield. The dance had given her a taste of belonging, but Thomas's barbed words and Clara's predatory gaze lingered like storm clouds. She stood in the boarding house's tiny kitchen, kneading dough with fierce determination, the scent of yeast grounding her. Today she'd take on more than laundry or gardening. She'd prove she was more than the town's gossip. Eliza bustled in her apron, streaked with flour. "Got a new job for you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "The schoolhouse needs fixing, leaky roof, wobbly benches. Caleb's leading the work, but they're short on hands." You and Abigail's hands paused on the dough. Working with Caleb meant facing Clara's shadow, but it also meant a chance to show Willow Creek her strength. "I'm in," she said, wiping her hands. She wasn't just building a schoolhouse, she was building her place here. The schoolhouse sat on a hill, its weathered boards sagging under the weight of neglect. Caleb was already there, hammer in hand, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders, as he hauled lumber. A handful of townsfolk milled about, men mostly, but also a few women, including Clara, who hovered near Caleb, her laughter bright and calculated. Abigail's stomach tightened, but she grabbed a hammer and joined the crew, her movements sure from years of farm work. She drove nails with precision, each strike a defiance of the whispers that followed her. Caleb noticed. "You've got a good arm," he said, pausing to hand her a canteen. His fingers brushed hers, and the brief contact sent a warmth up her arm. "Learned from my father," she replied, taking a sip. "He wasn't much for words, but he taught me to build." Caleb's eyes held her steady and searching. Sounds like a man worth learning from. The moment stretched fragile as a spider's web until Clara's voice cut through. "Caleb, we need you over here." She called, her tone sweet but commanding. He sighed, gave Abigail a nod, and walked away. The work was grueling, the sun climbing high, but Abigail thrived on it. She hauled planks, patched leaks, and even showed a young carpenter how to reinforce a joint. The townsfolk began to watch, not with scorn but curiosity. A grizzled farmer named Amos grunted approval as she steadied a beam. "You're no stranger to hard work," he said. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall of their judgment. At noon, the crew gathered under a sprawling oak for lunch. Abigail sat with Eliza sharing cornbread and cheese when Thomas Grayson sauntered over, his shadow falling across her. "Still here, Miss Warren," he said, his smile cold. "You're wasting your time. This town doesn't need another burden." The words hit like a fist, but before Abigail could respond, Caleb was there, his voice low but firm. "She's no burden, Thomas. She's doing more for this schoolhouse than you ever will." Thomas's eyes narrowed, but he backed off, muttering under his breath. Clara, watching from a distance, approached as Thomas left. "Don't mind him, Abigail," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Some women just don't fit." She glanced at Caleb, her meaning clear. Abigail's temper flared, but she kept her voice even. "I'm not here to fit your mold, Clara. I'm here to build." Clara's smile tightened, and she flounced away, but the exchange left a bitter taste. As the day ended, the schoolhouse stood stronger, its roof patched, its benches sturdy. Caleb walked Abigail back toward the boarding house, the sunset painting the mountains in hues of amber and rose. "You did good today," he said, his voice warm. "Folks are starting to see you." Abigail met his gaze, her heart daring to hope. "And you? What do you see?" His smile was slow, deliberate. "Someone who doesn't quit." That night, as she lay in bed, the scent of sawdust still clinging to her skin, Abigail felt the ground shift beneath her. Thomas and Clara were thorns, but Caleb's faith, Amos's respect, Eliza's friendship, they were roots taking hold. She wasn't just surviving Willow Creek. She was starting to shape it. But Clara's game wasn't over, and Thomas's cruelty had a purpose she didn't yet understand. Tomorrow she'd keep building her life, her strength, and maybe something more with the man whose steady gaze made her feel truly seen. The wind carried the sharp tang of rain as Abigail stepped onto the boarding house porch, her breath visible in the early morning chill. Willow Creek felt different today, the air heavy with the promise of a storm, and something else, a tension she couldn't name. Yesterday's work at the schoolhouse had earned her a few nods from the townsfolk, but Thomas Grayson's venom and Clara's cunning lingered like a bruise. Abigail tightened her shawl, determined to keep moving forward. She'd learned long ago that waiting for approval was a fool's game. Eliza had secured her another job, helping at the general store, restocking shelves and tallying orders. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and Abigail needed every coin to carve out her independence. The store was a hub of gossip, though, and as she stepped inside, Margaret's cold stare met her like a wall. "Don't expect a warm welcome," the shopkeeper snapped, shoving a ledger at her. "Just do the work and stay out of trouble." Abigail bit back a retort, her hands steady as she began sorting sacks of flour and sugar, the dusty air tickling her nose. The morning passed in a blur of labor, but the whispers followed her. Customers lingered, their eyes flicking her way, their voices low. "Grayson says she's trouble," one woman murmured to another. "Clara says she's after Caleb Holt, bold as brass." Abigail's grip tightened on a sack of beans, but she kept her head down. She wasn't here to fight rumors, she was here to build a life. Still, the weight of their words pressed harder with each passing hour. At midday, Caleb appeared, his hat dusted with raindrops, a bundle of furs under his arm to trade. His presence was a balm, his easy nod cutting through the store's chill. "Heard you're keeping this place in order," he said, leaning against the counter as she tallied his trade. His voice was warm, but his eyes held a flicker of concern. "Folks giving you trouble?" Abigail hesitated, then shrugged. "Nothing I can't handle." He studied her as if weighing her words, then said, "You don't have to handle it alone." Before she could respond, Clara swept in her green dress, vibrant against the store's drab shelves. "Caleb, you're here!" She chirped, her smile bright, but her eyes sharp as they landed on Abigail. "I was just telling Thomas how we need a proper festival to celebrate the schoolhouse repairs. You'll help organize it, won't you?" Her tone was all sweetness, but Abigail caught the challenge beneath it. Clara was staking her claim not just on Caleb, but on the town's approval. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'll think on it," he said, his voice neutral, but his glance at Abigail held a silent apology. As Clara prattled on, Abigail overheard a new rumor from two farmers at the counter. Thomas was pushing the town council to deny her a permanent place in Willow Creek, claiming she was a disruptive influence. The words hit like a stone, threatening the fragile roots she'd begun to plant. She excused herself, stepping outside to the porch, the rain now a soft drizzle that dampened her hair. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist, and for a moment she wondered if she'd been a fool to come here. Caleb followed her out, his boots quiet on the wet wood. "Don't let them shake you," he said, standing close enough that she could smell the leather and pine on him. "Thomas is scared of anyone who doesn't bow to him. And Clara, she's playing a game." Abigail met his eyes, her voice low. "And are you part of her game?" He flinched, but his gaze held steady. "I loved her once. Thought she was my future. But that was a long time ago. I'm not the man I was then." His words were raw, unguarded, and they stirred something in Abigail, a hope she didn't dare name. Before she could speak, a shout came from the street. Amos, the farmer from the schoolhouse, waved her over, his face grim. "Trouble at Widow Jenkins' place," he said. "Someone tore up her garden last night, your work ruined." Abigail's heart sank. The garden was her first mark on this town, a symbol of her strength. She followed Amos, Caleb at her side, the rain now falling harder. At the homestead, the neat rows she'd toiled over were trampled, the soil churned to mud. Widow Jenkins stood by, her eyes blazing. "This wasn't no animal," she said. "This was spite." Abigail's fists clenched. Thomas, or Clara, or both. They wanted her gone, and they'd hit where it hurt. But as she looked at the ruined earth, Caleb's hand brushed her shoulder, steady and warm. "We'll fix it," he said. "Together." The rain streaked his face, but his resolve mirrored her own. She nodded, her voice firm. "Let's get to work." Rain clung to Abigail's skin like a second skin, each drop a cold reminder of the malice that had torn apart Widow Jenkins's garden. The muddy earth squelched beneath her boots as she knelt, salvaging what she could of the trampled sprouts. The destruction felt personal, a deliberate strike at the roots she'd begun to plant in Willow Creek. Caleb worked beside her, his hands steady as he cleared debris, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. The air smelled of wet soil and pine, and despite the ache in her chest, Abigail felt a fire kindling. She wouldn't let this break her. Widow Jenkins stood under the eaves of her cabin, her frail frame rigid with fury. "It's that Grayson boy," she spat, her voice carrying over the patter of rain. "Or that Clara with her honeyed lies. They've got no right." Abigail met her eyes, nodding. "They won't win," she said, her voice steady despite the doubt gnawing at her. She'd faced rejection before, but this was different, calculated, cruel. Whoever did this wanted her to feel small, unwanted. But she was done shrinking. Caleb handed her a trowel, his fingers brushing hers warm against the chill. "We'll make it better than before," he said, his blue-gray eyes steady. "You've got a gift for making things grow." His words weren't just about the garden, and Abigail felt a flush climb her cheeks. She focused on the soil, digging new rows, but his faith in her was a seed of its own, taking root in her heart. Amos arrived with a cart of tools and seedlings, his gruff voice cutting through the rain. "Heard what happened. Ain't right." He joined them, and soon a few others trickled in. Eliza the blacksmith, a young mother named Sarah, who'd smiled at Abigail at the dance. The group worked through the afternoon, their hands turning the ruined plot into something new. Sarah shared stories of her own struggles as a newcomer, her words weaving a thread of connection. "Folks here take time to warm up," she said, patting Abigail's arm, "but they're starting to see you." The rain eased by dusk, leaving a sky streaked with violet and gold. The garden was reborn, its rows neat and promising, a testament to their collective effort. Abigail's muscles ached, but her spirit felt lighter. These people, strangers just days ago, had chosen to stand with her. As they packed up, Eliza pulled her aside. "Word's spreading about Thomas and Clara," she whispered. "They're planning a town meeting to push you out, saying you're stirring trouble. But Amos and Sarah are rallying folks to speak for you." Abigail's stomach twisted. A meeting Thomas's influence ran deep, and Clara's charm could sway a crowd. She glanced at Caleb, who was helping Amos load the cart, his shirt clinging to his shoulders, his laughter warm as he teased the older man. Could she trust him to stand by her, or would Clara's pull draw him back? She pushed the thought away. She'd fight her own battles, but his support, his belief in her, mattered more than she wanted to admit. That evening at the boarding house, Abigail sat by the fire, the crackle of logs mingling with the scent of Eliza's stew. Caleb joined them for supper, his presence filling the small room. He spoke of his past, losing his parents young, building his small ranch from nothing, loving Clara, only to watch her leave. Thought I'd never trust again. He set his eyes on the flames, then shifting to Abigail. But some people make you want to try. Her breath caught the weight of his words settling between them like a shared secret. As he left, he paused at the door, the night air cool behind him. Whatever happens at that meeting, Abigail, you're not alone. His voice was low earnest, and it carried her through a restless night. She dreamed of fields blooming under her hands, of Caleb's steady gaze, but also of Thomas's smirk and Clara's calculating smile. The meeting loomed like a storm, and she'd need every ounce of her strength to face it. By morning, the garden stood as a quiet victory, but the town buzzed with tension. Abigail walked to the store, her head high, though her heart raced. She'd face Thomas and Clara not as the outcast they wanted her to be, but as a woman claiming her place. And if Caleb stood with her, maybe they could face it together. The town hall glowed under the flicker of oil lamps, its wooden walls humming with the murmurs of Willow Creek's gathered folk. Abigail stood at the back, her hands clasped tightly to hide their tremble, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and nervous sweat. Tonight was the town meeting, and Thomas Grayson's campaign to cast her out had drawn a crowd. She felt their eyes, some curious, some hostile, a few kind, but she stood tall, her blue muslin dress a quiet armor. She'd come to this town for a new life, and she wouldn't let it be snatched away without a fight. Thomas stood at the front, his tailored coat pristine, his voice smooth as he addressed the crowd. Willow Creek thrives on order, he said, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on Abigail with a smirk. We can't afford disruptions from outsiders who don't belong. The word outsider landed like a stone, and whispers rippled through the crowd. Clara, seated near the front, her golden curls catching the lamplight, nodded in agreement, her smile sharp. Abigail's chest tightened, but she kept her chin high, her eyes scanning for allies. Caleb was there, leaning against a wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Eliza sat nearby, her jaw set, and Amos and Sarah were scattered among the crowd, their presence a small comfort. But Thomas held sway, his wealth and charm a tide pulling others along. Miss Warren came under false pretenses, he continued, his tone dripping with false regret. She's caused trouble, vandalism, discord. We must protect our community. The lie about the garden stung, and Abigail's temper flared. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs. I didn't destroy Widow Jenkins' garden, she said, her words clear and firm. I rebuilt it with help from folks who know what community really means. She glanced at Caleb, then Amos, her heart pounding. I came here to work to build, not to tear anything down. If that's a disruption, then maybe Willow Creek needs shaking up. A few gasps rose, but so did nods. Sarah's, Eliza's, even the blacksmith's. Thomas's smile faltered, but Clara stood, her voice honeyed but venomous. Abigail, dear, no one doubts your effort, she said, her eyes glinting. But a woman must know her place. Chasing after men like Caleb, stirring trouble, it's unbecoming. The jab was deliberate, and Abigail felt the crowd's eyes shift to her, weighing her worth. Before she could respond, Caleb stepped forward, his voice low but carrying like a drumbeat. Clara, that's enough. Abigail's done more for this town in a week than you have in a year, and she's not chasing anyone, she's standing her ground. The room stilled, the weight of his words settling over them. Thomas's face reddened, but Caleb wasn't done. Thomas, you called her here, then shamed her for not fitting your picture. That's not leadership, it's cruelty. And if anyone's stirring trouble, it's you. A murmur of agreement rose louder now from Amos, Sarah, and others who'd worked with Abigail. Widow Jenkins stood, her voice sharp. That girl saved my garden. Whoever tore it up, it wasn't her. I'd wager it was someone closer to you, Grayson. The crowd erupted in whispers, and Abigail saw doubt flicker in their eyes. Thomas tried to regain control, but the tide was turning. Eliza stood next, her voice booming. Abigail's worked hard, helped us all. If you're so keen on order, Thomas, why is your name tied to every bit of spite in this town? The question hung unanswered, and Abigail felt a surge of hope. These people, some strangers, still were choosing her side. Clara's smile vanished, and she whispered something to Thomas, who banged his gavel. We'll vote next week, he snapped, dismissing the meeting. As the crowd dispersed, Abigail's legs trembled, but she stood firm. Caleb approached, his eyes warm, with something deeper than friendship. You were fearless tonight, he said, his voice soft. I meant what I said, you belong here. Her throat tightened and she managed a nod, the scent of his leather jacket grounding her. Outside, the night air was sharp, the stars bright against the velvet sky. Eliza linked arms with her, whispering, "You've got more allies than you know." But as Abigail glanced back, she saw Thomas and Clara huddled together, their faces dark with intent. The fight wasn't over, but tonight she'd held her ground. And Caleb's words, his belief in her, lit a fire she wasn't ready to name. The meadow beyond Willow Creek glowed with the warmth of 100 lanterns, their light dancing on the faces of townsfolk gathered for the festival. The air was thick with the scents of roasted corn, fresh-baked pies, and the sharp tang of cider, while a fiddle and banjo wove a lively tune. Abigail stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart a mix of nerves and resolve. Clara's challenge at the town meeting had been a gauntlet thrown down, a call for Abigail to prove herself at this celebration of the schoolhouse repairs. She knew it was a trap, but she'd walked into it with eyes wide open, determined to show Willow Creek her strength. She wore her blue muslin dress, again patched, but clean, her hair braided with a ribbon Eliza had lent her. The festival was her chance to cement her place, not just as an outsider, but as a woman who belonged. She'd spent days helping organize hauling tables, baking bread, even carving wooden toys for the children's games. Her hands bore new calluses, but each one felt like a badge of her grit. Tonight she'd face Clara and Thomas not with anger, but with the quiet power of her work. The crowd buzzed with energy, children darting through the grass, couples swaying to the music. Abigail spotted Caleb near the bonfire, his lean frame outlined by the flames, his laugh warm as he tossed a ball with a group of boys. Her chest tightened at the sight of him. His kindness, his steadiness, had become a cornerstone of her new life. But Clara was never far, her crimson dress a bold splash against the crowd, her laughter ringing as she looped her arm through Caleb's. Abigail's resolve hardened. She wasn't here to compete for him. She was here for herself. Eliza nudged her forward, a basket of cornbread in her hands. "Go on, show him what you've got," she said, her eyes gleaming. Abigail took the basket, weaving through the crowd to the food tables, where Sarah and Amos greeted her with smiles. "Your bread's a hit," Sarah said, pointing to the nearly empty tray. "Folks can't stop talking about it." The praise warmed Abigail, but as she turned, she caught Thomas's voice, sharp and deliberate, from a nearby group. "She's trying too hard," he said, loud enough for her to hear. "A few loaves won't make her one of us." Before Abigail could respond, a commotion broke out near the children's games. A little girl had fallen, her knee bloodied, her cries piercing the festive hum. Abigail moved without thinking, kneeling beside her, her voice soft. "Let's fix you up, sweetheart." She tore a strip from her own petticoat, binding the wound with steady hands. The girl's mother, a woman who'd once whispered against her, touched Abigail's shoulder. "Thank you," she said, her eyes soft with gratitude. The moment was small but seismic, another crack in the town's armor. Clara, watching from a distance, seized her moment. She climbed onto a makeshift stage, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Let's thank everyone who made this festival possible," she said, her smile radiant. "And let's honor those who truly belong in Willow Creek." Her eyes flicked to Abigail, sharp with intent, as she called for a dance to celebrate our unity. The crowd cheered, but Abigail sensed the trap. Clara would use the dance to shine, to cast Abigail as an outsider once more. As couples paired off, Clara pulled Caleb to the center, her movements graceful, her laughter drawing eyes. Abigail stood back, her heart pounding, until Amos approached, his grizzled face kind. "Care to dance, Miss Abigail?" he asked. She hesitated, then took his hand, joining the reel. Her steps were sure, her smile genuine, and soon others joined them, their laughter drowning out Clara's calculated charm. Abigail caught Caleb's eye across the crowd, his expression unreadable, but intense, as if he saw only her. The dance ended and Clara's smile tightened as the crowd clapped for Abigail and Amos. But the night wasn't over. Thomas stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chatter. "A toast to Willow Creek's future," he said, raising a glass. "To those who uphold our values, not those who challenge them." His eyes locked on Abigail, a clear challenge. The crowd hushed, tension rippling through the air. Abigail stepped forward, her voice clear. "To Willow Creek," she said, raising her own glass of cider. "To growth, to kindness, to second chances." Her words were simple but fierce, and the crowd erupted in cheers, Sarah and Eliza loudest of all. Thomas's face darkened, but he said nothing. Clara's smile was a thin line, her defeat unspoken but clear. As the bonfire crackled, Caleb found Abigail, his hand brushing hers. "You're changing this place," he said, his voice low, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "And maybe me too." Her heart raced, but before she could speak, a child tugged her away to join another game. The night spun on vibrant and alive, and Abigail felt Willow Creek shift. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The bonfire's embers glowed like scattered stars against the night, their warmth a faint echo of the fire now burning in Abigail's heart. The festival had been a triumph, not just for her, but for the idea that Willow Creek could be more than its prejudices. She stood by the meadow's edge, the scent of charred wood and wildflowers heavy in the air, watching the last dancers sway under the lanterns. Thomas's toast had failed to unseat her, and Clara's charm had dimmed in the face of her resolve. But the victory felt fragile, like a seedling in rocky soil, and Abigail knew the fight for her place wasn't over. Caleb appeared beside her, his presence as steady as the mountains looming in the distance. His hat was off his dark hair, catching the moonlight, and his blue-gray eyes held a quiet intensity. "You were something tonight," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. Abigail's breath caught, but she kept her tone light. "Just doing what needed doing." He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "No, Abigail. You're doing more than that. You're making this town better." Before she could respond, a shout broke the moment. Amos waved them over to the food tables, where Eliza and Sarah were organizing a final cleanup. "Need your hands, Abigail." Eliza called her grin infectious. Abigail joined them, stacking plates and folding cloths, the work grounding her. The townsfolk around her, once distant, judgmental, now smiled. Some even thanking her for her bread, her help, her presence. It wasn't universal. Margaret still shot her cold glances, and Thomas lingered nearby, his silence heavy with defeat. But the tide had turned, and Abigail felt it in her bones. Clara approached, her crimson dress muted in the fading light, her smile tight. "You've made quite the impression," she said, her tone laced with grudging respect. "But don't think this changes everything." Abigail met her gaze unflinching. "I'm not here to change everything, Clara. Just my corner of it." Clara's eyes narrowed, but she turned away, her usual confidence shaken. Abigail knew Clara's pursuit of Caleb wasn't over, but for tonight she'd lost ground. As the festival wound down, Caleb walked Abigail back to the boarding house, the night air cool and alive with the hum of crickets. The stars above were a vast, glittering promise, and for the first time Abigail felt like she could reach them. "I meant what I said," Caleb murmured, pausing by the porch. "You're changing me too." His voice was raw, unguarded, and when his hand found hers warm and calloused, Abigail's heart raced. "Caleb," she started, but he stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "I've been running from my past, from Clara, from trust. But you make me want to stop running." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Abigail's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. "I came here for a husband," she said softly, "but I found something better myself. And maybe," she hesitated, then smiled, "maybe you." Caleb's grin was slow, radiant, and when he leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a tentative, tender kiss, the world fell away. The kiss was a vow not just of love, but of partnership built on respect and shared strength. Months later, Abigail and Caleb stood hand in hand in the rebuilt schoolhouse, now filled with children's laughter. They'd married in a quiet ceremony by the river, with Eliza, Sarah, Amos, and Widow Jenkins as witnesses. Thomas had left town, his influence eroded, and Clara had retreated to San Francisco, her schemes undone. Abigail had opened a small bakery, her bread a staple in every home, and Caleb's ranch thrived with her help. Together they'd started a community garden, teaching children to plant and tend, leaving a legacy of growth. As they stood in the schoolhouse, sunlight streaming through new windows, Abigail felt the weight of her journey, every rejection, every whispered slight, every hard-won victory. She'd come to Willow Creek an outcast, but she'd built a home, a love, a life. Caleb squeezed her hand, his eyes warm. "We did this," he said. She nodded, her heart full. "We did." The town had changed, not just for her, but because of her. And as the children ran past, their voices bright, Abigail knew she'd planted more than seeds, she'd planted hope. If you love this story of resilience and love triumphing over prejudice, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel now to explore more.